are gonna build the backend of one of the most complete chat applications built here on YouTube. To show you what we'll be having at the end of this video, let me log in. I'm gonna log in with John Doe here, and here I'm gonna log in with Unclear. So the password is also gonna be Anne. Sign in. So as you can see, Anne doesn't have any message here, and also John. So let's say while Anne is scrolling, John would try to send her a message. We're gonna say hi Anne and send. So Anne would receive a pop-up, a notification pop-up, and when she clicks on it, so she's able to see the number of messages that are not read. Let's say she didn't read and she comes back and Anne sent another one. How are you doing? So now there are two notifications corresponding to the number of messages that are not read. So now if she clicks here, the messages are going to be marked as read and she can reply to John instantaneously. So if she says hi, John is going to receive the message instantaneously, as you can see. And John can also receive notifications. I'm going to say I'm fine, you. And now as you can see, we have this, and John is able to mark it as read as well. So we'll be building the backend of the chat that you are seeing here using Spring Boot, Java, and WebSocket. Without further ado, let me go to the GitHub repo and clone it. Then open the backend folder with IntelliJ. Then I'm gonna run my Docker containers, then the backend on watch mode, and then the server. You can do all of this reading the README on the repo. So as you can see, the Spring Boot server is running on port 8080, and we have everything that we did in previous videos. We covered authentication, we covered the feed where you can post comments and like, and we covered notifications in the previous video where we explained what WebSockets are. We integrated them with the Spring Boot and we implemented the notifications where we're able to send notifications when someone like a post or comment a post. And if we look into our database schema, I'm gonna be using MySQL Workbench. And if you didn't follow the previous one, we're using actually a MySQL database that we are running with the help of our Docker. So I'm gonna be logging in. This connection, I have actually created it in the previous video. I have just stored it, and if you are creating this right now, you just have to actually click here on this new, and you're gonna be shown a tab that will look like this, and you just need to give a name for your connection and then use this host name, which is the local host actually, and the port, it should be 3306 because that's what we have here. Okay, and then the username is root and the password is also root as we are saying here. Okay, and then you hit enter, and that's what we will be having. And the tables that we have here, that is what we needed to build all the logic for the previous features, for the authentication, for the feed where we implemented posts and the ability to like a post, to comment a post, and also the ability to send notifications that we did in the previous video. And this one will be updating our database schema, but also our code, so that we are able to have the backend logic for our chat. And the front end of the chat is, as you already know, is built with React, and we'll be building it in the upcoming video. And this one will only gonna be focusing on the backend side, using the what I showed you, the final result, as a design blueprint, so that we know what our front-end team is expecting from us and build on top of. And here on this tab, I am actually connected to the final code of the front end, and we'll be using this to know how we would change our backend, because everything is actually should be oriented as like you should be thinking of how my final user will be interacting with my software, and design your software based on that. That's how I see software engineering. So by having the final design of the front end, we're going to be able to design our backend accordingly. Okay, and if you are following along, going from this commit, you won't be seeing this on your front end that you have locally. Okay, because at the time of making this video, the front end video is not done yet. So the first thing is that when the user want to create a conversation with someone, he would click on this button and he would see these users. Okay, and he can search actually within these users, and he would select one. Okay, and he would send a message. So and the first thing that we need to do is that when we come here, the user should be able to ask us the users that he is connected to, and that's what we will be doing. So now we're going to go into the code, and we are going to do that in our here in our controller, because here where we are handling everything that's related to users. So here we'll be having a get users endpoint. I'm going to paste it and explain what it does. Okay, like so, and we'll be actually just grabbing the authenticated user and returning all the users in our database without the user that's logged in himself. Okay, and in upcoming videos will be when we implement connections here, instead of showing just all the users without the connected one, we'll be showing its connections. Okay, for now we are going to go with that, and then we need to create this function into our service here, and this function is actually going to call our authentication user repository, and we would call this function. Okay, and we don't have it. This one we need to create it in our repository here, like so. And this is going to run a SQL query where it would say find all the users where the ID is not the given ID. And also I'm not going to be going in depth about the Spring Data GPA and how it's doing its magic to let us query and create entities, because we did go in depth about all of this in the video number 4 of the playlist, the one that where the thumbnail says more Spring Data GPA. Coming back, what we did, so we have created an endpoint that will be mapped to API version 1 /authentication/ users, and it will return all the users except the user that's making the request, meaning the authenticated user, and this authenticated user is coming from our authentication system, like the filter that we built during the authentication video. So that's the first step that's done, and the front end is going to call this endpoint to grab these users. Wondering where these users are coming from, they are actually coming from our database. Like if I go here and grab all the users, as you can see they are here, and we are creating them when the application starts using this configuration class. Okay, now we're gonna be thinking about what happens when a user select another one and sends a message. Okay, you might be maybe thinking that we just need to actually create a message in our database and send it. Actually, it's not as simple as that. I mean, like when you create a message between two users, this message is actually not like alone, in the sense that multiple messages can be exchanged in one conversation. So the first thing that we need actually is a conversation, and a conversation is going to be containing multiple messages. So let us come back into the code, and here in the features folder we'll be creating a new folder, and it's gonna be called messaging, like so. And here we'll be having a model folder where I'm gonna say don't ask, because I'm gonna be committing all of this at the end of the video. So I didn't mean to create a class actually, so I'm gonna let me delete this. I wanted to create a folder, so model, and here we are going to create our conversation model. So conversation, like so. And I'm going to paste what this conversation is going to contain and explain it. Okay, it's gonna make a sense. So a conversation, so we're gonna be marking it as an entity, so that it will create a database table called conversation with an S. And then we have our ID. We're saying that it is auto-generated. And then a conversation is going to have actually an author, like the person that will create the conversation. And then the recipient is the other one, the other person that will be part of the conversation. Okay, and then the conversation is going to have a list of messages. Okay, and then we used to have a constructor, an empty constructor, and then getters and setters. This only empty constructor we actually need it because the Jackson library that will convert this conversation into JSON needs it. Okay, and also the Hibernate, the Spring ORM that is running behind the Spring GPA needs it. And if you really don't understand of what I'm doing here, like the many-to-one relations and the one-to-many relations, as I said, the video number 4 is going to be a great asset for you. But what we are doing here is that we are saying that a conversation is actually like a conversation is going to be having only one author, and an author can have multiple conversations. And also we're saying here with the many-to-one, we're saying a conversation is going to have only one recipient, but a recipient can have multiple conversations. And then we are saying the conversation is going to have a list of messages, and this message we don't have it. I'm going to create in a bit. So that's what we have, but we have an error here. So our here is failing, so our application didn't restart, which is why if we go here and we refresh, we won't be seeing the conversation table here. So for that, I'm going to go here and in the model again, and I'm going to create a Java class that's going to be called message. And I'm going to paste the message and also explain what it contains, like so. So it's a Java, a GPA entity. It's going to create a table called messages. It has an ID, and a message is going to have one sender, and a sender can have multiple messages. So that's what we are doing here. And then we are saying also that a message have only one receiver, and the receiver can have multiple messages. And finally here we're saying that a message belongs to one and only one conversation, and a conversation can have multiple messages with the many-to-one relation here. And then a message will contain a content like the actual message. And also we have this is red, which is a boolean that we will use to show the red bubble that I showed you on the UI. And finally we have also a creation date, and then a constructor and getters and setters. So now if you come back here, like it should be green, and our here it's successful. So here it would have restarted. Okay, now if I refresh the database here, sorry, like so. As you can see now, we have a conversations table. If we look, we have the author, the recipient ID, and the ID of the conversation. And if we look into the messages here, okay, we have the isRead. We also have the conversation ID, the created at, the receiver ID, and also the sender ID. And if we look into the foreign keys tab here, as you can see, it's saying that the sender ID is a foreign key that is mapped to the ID in the users table. Same for the receiver ID and same for the conversation ID. And to be able to query the tables, we are going to be needing to create a the repositories. Okay, so I'm going to create a package that's going to be called repository, like so. And sorry, it shouldn't be in here. I'm going to delete it. It should be in the messaging. So like so. I'm going to remove the model, like so. And here we'll be having two repositories, the one for our conversation entity table, if you are speaking MySQL language instead of Java language. So it's going to be repository, like so. And I'm going to paste it as well, as it's going to be very straightforward and explain. So it is extending the GPA repository as any repository in a Spring Data GPA would. And then we are defining two custom queries here. So the first one will return all the conversations where the author and the recipient, like where the author is this one and the recipient is this one. Okay, and then we have another where we are returning where the author is this user, or okay, or the recipient is this user. Okay, I'm actually going to call them user 1 and user 2. I think it's better, like so. And as of now, it's like grayish because it's saying it's not used in the code base, which is normal. And also we're going to create the repository for our message. So it's going to be message repository, like so. And I am going to paste it. So the message repository is going to be also extending the GPA repository, and it doesn't contain any custom message, any custom function. Let us come back to the conversation. So we were saying that a conversation would have an author, and an author can have multiple conversations. Same for the recipient. There's one thing that we need to do here in the user model. We're gonna here add actually the list of conversations of the user where he's the author, and also the list of conversation of the user where he is the recipient. Okay, and I'm also going to be adding getters and setters for this, as well as for this one. And we are using the JSON ignore from the Jackson library, so this one, to say that when we query this user, I don't want you to also try to send me this conversation as author. Actually, if like we didn't do that, because when we try to fetch this conversation, it's gonna find that there is a user that it should try to grab. So when trying to convert the user also into JSON, he would find within the JSON, within the user, this conversation. So there will be a loop, and it will cause problems. And we actually had to deal with this problem in the previous videos. So and also we are saying here that whenever I delete or modify a user, I want you to also impact its conversations. For example, when I delete a user, I want you to delete all the conversations where he's the author, but also the conversation where he's the recipient. Okay, so this way we are making our database to do the cleanup instead of us having to do it manually. Our database with the ORM that's behind Spring Data GPA, which is Hibernate. So when we delete a user, we're going to be deleting all his conversations. And if we look within the conversations, when a conversation gets deleted, we are also deleting all the messages. And that will ensure data integrity in our database. And we covered, as I said, this in depth in the video number 4 when we were talking about Spring Data GPA and while we were building the feed, like the homepage where we handle posts, likes, and comments. Now let us go and create our controller and our service so we are able to test all of this out. So I'm gonna create a service folder and we're gonna call it messaging service, like so, and it's going to be a service. And then I'm also gonna go ahead and create a package for the controller, like so. Same is going to be messaging controller, like so. And this one is going to be a REST controller, and it's going to have a mapping. It's going to be a request mapping, like so, and we'll be mapping things that are going to be to API like this. So if you remember, for all our controller we have a similar pattern. Like here we're handling everything that's related to authentication and also like user data, and here we are handling all the things that are related to the feed. And so we are doing kind of the same thing here with the messaging. Here we're gonna grab our service, which is being this, and we're gonna instantiate it using our constructor so that it's auto-wired by Spring Boot. And here, so the first endpoint that we'll be having is going to be a get mapping to / conversations. Okay, this is the endpoint that the front end is gonna call. For example, if I come here, sorry, I'm gonna log again. I'm gonna say an.clar at example.com. This is going to be an. So if we come here, what we're seeing here actually is the grabbing of all the conversations of this user. So that's the first endpoint that we need here. So this is going to be a public that is going to return a list of conversation. Let me import the list from JavaUtil, and this is going to be a good conversation, but not like this. Actually, what we are going to do is here we are going to use the request attribute. Okay, and then it's messing the code. So yeah, we're going to do the request attribute to grab the authenticated user. Okay, import this, and then what we're going to say is return to me all the conversations of this user. And obviously this method we need to create it in our service. So I'm gonna say create this in the service, and this one is gonna just make a call to our database, and for that we are gonna be needing the conversation service repository. Add it also in a constructor like so. And in here what we do is that we are gonna simply return our conversation repository, and we're gonna call the find by author or recipient, and we're gonna give the user. So this is actually the custom method that we added here. So basically what it's doing is that it's gonna go ahead and grab all the conversation in our database where the author is this user, or the recipient is this user, and we, in our case, the user is the same, so it's the same one. So that's what we're doing. So I'm gonna save all of this, and let us test out. Actually, I'm gonna go into Postman here. I'm gonna duplicate this one. I used this one to test the creation, and we'll be using it in a bit. So it's going to be a get method to / conversations, and you need to actually call the login endpoint to get this token for this to work, because it's a private route. And what I do is actually I add it on the project level here, save it, and here I would simply say that my authorization should inherit from the parent. Okay, and here I'm going to say get conversations of a user. So save, and I'm gonna send. So as you can see, we are getting an empty array, which is normal because we don't have any conversation so far. Because actually what you are seeing here, this is targeting the finished endpoint URLs. Okay, so the finished endpoint is running on localhost 8081. If I show you, actually, that's what's happening. So as you can see here, we're actually calling 8081. So coming back to the code, before adding the endpoint for creating a conversation, I'm also going to be adding a get to get one single conversation instead of all of them. Okay, so this here, we're going to grab the conversation ID from the pass here, and we obviously need to create this get conversation. And I'm going to go ahead, and then I'm going to say create this in the service. Okay, and I'm going to paste it and explain as it's also straightforward. So what we are doing is that we're going to use the conversation repository like before, and we're going to try to find the conversation ID, and if you don't, we're going to throw conversation not found. Okay, then we're going to check that the user that is asking for the conversation is either the author of the conversation or the recipient of the conversation. If it's not the case, we're going to throw an illegal exception and say user not authorized to view the conversation. And finally, we're going to return the conversation. So coming back, it's green now. So now we need to create the endpoint that's called when I click here and I choose a user and send a message. There is a conversation that's being created, and with one message being this. Okay, sorry about this. I have all of them. Yeah, but basically that's what we need to do. So it's going to be a post mapping. Okay, so below this one, I'm going to add it, and this one is also going to grab the authenticated user. So the authenticated user is going to be the sender, obviously, of the sender of the message and the author of the conversation. And also then we're going to be needing a message DTO. I'm going to be creating this in a bit, and then we're going to call a function from our service, and we're going to say create conversation and add message to it. Okay, and we'll give it the sender, the receiver ID, and also the message content. And this message DTO, we need to create it. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to create a DTO package. DTO, if you already don't know, it stands for data transfer layer. Okay, and here I'm going to create a Java class which is going to be called message DTO, and this message DTO is going to be a record, so that will have a receiver ID and a string, which is going to be our content. and then here I'm going to import it. Okay, now we need to create this function. So I'm going to go into the messaging service here, and I'm going to add it, and I'm going to explain, bear with me. Okay, so it's going to be a transactional. Why we're doing it? We're doing because we'll be doing different like database queries in this method I'm going to be showing you in a bit, and when one of them fails, we want to revert all the changes that we made. Okay, for example, we don't want to create a conversation and, for example, the adding of the message fails. Okay, if that happens, we need to revert back everything. So we're going to be needing the authentication service. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to say a private final is going to be authentication service, like so, and I'm going to add it. And this authentication service is the one that we are going to use to grab the receiver ID. Okay, while the sender is already a full like authentication user object because it's coming from our authentication. For the receiver, we're only getting its ID. Okay, so for that we need to go into our database and grab this receiver using its ID. We could have accessed like the authentication repository here, but I think that it's better to like separate things. We just ask the service to give us the user, and we don't know like how it's able to do that. For example, later on we will be adding like OAuth, like logging in with Google and stuff, and things might be different, like about how we would get the user. Okay, so I'm gonna go into the authentication service here, and I'm going to add this method somewhere below here, and it is going to be quite simple. So it's going to grab the receiver ID, use the authentication repository, try to find the user by ID, otherwise throw this user not found error. Okay, so I'm going to come back here and below. So the first thing that we are doing is that we are grabbing the receiver ID. Then what we do, we're going to use the conversation repository, and we're going to try to find by author and recipient, because remember, we only, for example, if let's say I come here and I try to create a new conversation with John. So if I click on this, I'm going to be shown the conversation that already exists. Okay, so by design we want that there should be only one-in-one conversation between two users. Okay, so that's what we are doing here. So we're going to say find by author and recipient. So if there is a conversation where the author is this one and the recipient is this one, if that's the case, we're going to throw an error. We're going to say conversation already exists, use the conversation ID to send messages. Then we're going to do the same below here. So we're going to say find by author and recipient, but this time like we're reversing. Okay, we're checking if there is one where the receiver is our receiver, like where the author is the receiver that we want to create, and the sender is the recipient of the conversation that we want to create, where he is the author. Okay, so if one of these happens, we want to also throw an exception. So if all of this went well, it means that there is no conversation between the two. So we are going to grab the conversation repository and create a conversation. We would give it the sender and the receiver. Then we're going to create a message. Let me import it. So we're going to create a message where the sender is our sender, the receiver is the receiver, also the conversation and the content. Remember, a message should be belonging to one and only one conversation. So that's with this, our constructor here is going to set this conversation property, which is being this one, where we have this many-to-one relation. Okay, and also we are ignoring the conversation here to avoid the looping problem that I explained earlier. And then we're also going to be needing the message repository, like so. Import it, and I'm gonna add it to the constructor so it gets auto-wired. So then what we are doing is that we are saving this conversation, and then we are adding the just created conversation to the conversation array, okay? Because the conversation, actually we are saving it before. We could have, like, after saving this, make a new database call and get the created conversation, in which case it would already contain the saved message, okay? But we could, when we can, to avoid another database call, it's always useful, okay? So then we add this, and we're gonna send this, return the conversation. And then what we're doing here is, like, on this line we're sending a notification. So I'm gonna grab the notification service and explain what we are doing. So this notification service, we are saying send the conversation to users. So it will send this conversation to the sender, but also to the receiver, okay? And this conversation service, we actually built it in the previous video, where we created the live updates for our feed, like where we created notifications when we like a post or when we comment a post. So it's using WebSockets, and it's using actually this configuration to do all of this. So where was I? I'm gonna come back here. So we're gonna go into this notification service and create the method that we are using here. So this method, coming back to the notification service, I'm gonna add it below here. So I'm gonna grab the conversation. So we're getting a conversation, we're getting a sender ID and a receiver ID, okay? And we're sending that to this topic where the sender is connected, like the sender client is connected, and this one where the receiver client is connected. So that's how the client is going to be able, for example, when the user is I don't know why I keep getting these errors, like when the client is surfing here and someone sent him a message, because we are using this, so the receiver ID is gonna receive a pop-up here saying there is a message that I showed you in the beginning of the video. Coming back to the service, so it's green now, and coming back to the controller, to the messaging controller, let me find it. So here it's also green. So we're gonna test all of this here in our postman. We're gonna try to grab like before, and we're gonna be getting empty, which is normal. But now we are going to call this endpoint, okay, the post that we created, and we're gonna send the message that we want to add in the receiver ID. And now if I send, as you can see, we're getting the response back. And since the login was done with John Doe, okay, the author of the conversation that is created is John Doe, which is user with the ID 1, and the recipient is Arnold, which is this one, okay, he has the ID number 3. And then we have the messages of this conversation that has been created. So as you can see, we have one message, the one that we just created, where we would have the sender, okay, and then we would have the receiver, the message content, whether it is read or not. By default it's not, because it's not read yet. And then we have the created at, okay. So when the client shows the message to the receiver, not the author, okay, when the receiver sees this message, it's gonna make an endpoint like a HTTP call and ask us to mark this message as read, and we will be creating the endpoint for that in a bit. But before, we are going here, we're gonna come back to our code, and we're gonna add an endpoint for adding a message to an existing conversation. Okay, so I'm gonna explain. So we are gonna be making a post to conversation, then the conversation ID, then the messages, and we're gonna say add like message to conversation. We're gonna grab the conversation ID, the sender, which will be the logged in user, the receiver ID coming from the same message DTO, and the message DTO content. So this message DTO actually is this one. Okay, so it's what we are sending for both the queries. Just that for adding a message to an existing conversation, our URL would contain the ID of the corresponding conversation. Okay, and I'm going to go into the service here and add this message conversation below the previous one here. So what we are doing here, we're saying first we're gonna use the same authentication service and grab the receiver ID. As I said, the sender is coming from our authentication, it's already fetched, but the receiver we only have an ID. So we're gonna grab the ID, then we're gonna try to find the conversation where the ID is the ID that is in the DTO, not in the DTO, in the URL, sorry. So if it doesn't exist, we're gonna throw an error. Then what we do, we're gonna check if the author of the conversation is our sender, or that the recipient of the conversation is our sender. We're gonna let it pass. If it is not the case, we're gonna throw an error, because like this user is not authorized to send a message in this channel. Okay, and actually we need another check. So we need to also check that the receiver ID actually is either the author of the conversation, or like the receiver of the message. Okay, or he is the receiver of the conversation. Okay, so here we're gonna say that yeah, we could actually change slightly the error message, as we're gonna say, actually I'm gonna say user does not belong to this conversation. Actually I'm gonna say receiver. Okay, that's good. So then we're gonna create the message, save it. Okay, then we're gonna add this message to the already fetched conversation. So we could, as I said earlier, fetch the conversation from the database. Like after having this, we are gonna be getting all the messages, including the one that we just created, but we could avoid this additional request to our database. Then we are going to return the message, but also we'll be sending the notifications. The first one is going to be the same as the one when we created the conversation, but also we need to send a message to the conversation itself. Like for example, if I am here, while I'm here, if Arnold responds to me without me refreshing anything, I'm able to get the message, and that's done actually with the help of this message that's being sent to the conversation itself. So we need to go into the service and create this one. I'm gonna add it somewhere below here. I'm gonna grab the message, and what we are doing is that we are sending to a topic that's called conversation ID, messages, and send the message. So as I said, all of this actually we did and explained in the previous video, the video that we made just before this one. So let us test this endpoint. I'm gonna come here and I am gonna say get conversation of the user, yeah, we don't have any, which is normal because when our application actually restart, so all the data is going to be gone, because that's what we are telling Spring Data GPA to do here. Okay, so I'm gonna go here and create the new conversation. So now we have a conversation that contains one message. If we try to grab all the conversations of the connected user, so we're gonna get an array that will contain one conversation. Okay, and within the conversation we have only one message. Now I'm gonna grab the ID of this conversation and I'm going to make a post to add a new message. So I'm going to duplicate this endpoint and I'm going to say add message to existing conversation, like so. So we need the conversation ID, I said, which is 1, and the it's going to be messages. Then save, and if we look within the body, so it is like I'm gonna send actually a new message that's gonna say hello world, and the receiver should be the same as the receiver, like the recipient in the conversation. Like if I try another receiver, we're gonna get, so as you can see, we're gonna get this error that is being thrown. So where was I? Let me find the messaging. That's what I wanted. Yeah, here, as you can see, since the user number 2 is actually not part of this conversation, is not part of the conversation 1, it's we're getting this error coming from this. Okay, so we're gonna send to the normal user and I'm gonna say send. So now, as you can see, we are getting back the message that we just created. And now if we go and grab our conversation, this time the message in the conversation will have 2 objects, and the second being where it says hello world. So the last remaining endpoint is the endpoint to call to mark a message as read. So I'm gonna come back here and I'm gonna go into the messaging controller here. It is going to be a put mapping, and it's gonna go to, actually, I'm gonna simplify this. So it's gonna go to conversations, then to messages, and then grab the message ID. Then here what we do is that we're gonna say mark message as read, and we're gonna grab the authentication user and the message ID, and we need to create this method within our authentication service here. So the first thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna try to grab the message, and or else we're gonna throw an illegal argument. We're gonna say that the message does not exist. So that's the first check that we do. Then we're gonna be having an if, and we're gonna say that if the receiver like of the message is not the current user, we are gonna say that the user is not authorized to mark the message as read. Okay, and finally we're gonna say message dot set is read to true. Okay, and we're gonna call the set is read to like and we're gonna call, sorry, the message repository and save it. I'm actually gonna remove this return as it's going to be a void. I don't want to send this, so I'm gonna come back here to the service, and here we'll simply be sending actually a response. Run this, and we're gonna say message marked as read. So that's it for this video, guys. I will be committing over everything that we did in the GitHub, and in the upcoming one we'll be building the UI. Like, let's say John is scrolling and Anne decides to send him a message. So she would say hi John, like so, send, so he would get this notification and he is able to see the number of messages that are not read yet. And if he click here, the request to the read is going to be made and this will be marked as read. So that's what we'll be doing in the upcoming one. Let me know what you have thought about this video. If you liked it, please let me know as well by liking the video, by sharing it with your friends who are also maybe interested in those topics, by commenting, and I will see you in the next one very soon. Thank you so much.